Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
When you grow up wanting to be Woodward or Bernstein, nobody tells you how much time you'll actually spend fighting with the printer. That's the first thing you learn in a modern newsroom. The legends got movie montages, you get paper jams and content management systems that crash if you look at them funny. My name is Ethan Ward. I'm 38, I work at a big metropolitan newspaper that still kills trees every morning, and for most of my adult life my job, and my marriage, were the two things I could point to and say, okay, I might be screwing everything else up, but these I'm doing right. The job came first. I started at the paper right out of college, back when people were still saying the internet is a fad with a straight face. Obits, community news, a 3-paragraph brief on a lost goat that somehow made A3. I clawed my way into Metro, learned how to read budgets, how to chase cops without getting arrested, and how to write tight enough that an editor could cut my last 3 paragraphs without killing the story. By my early 30s, I had landed where I'd always wanted to be, investigative. The team in the corner with too many coffee cups and a permanent low-grade feud with legal. We weren't glamorous. We didn't wear trench coats. Mostly, we wore hoodies and lived inside spreadsheets. But every now and then, we got a hit, something that actually rattled City Hall, got a corrupt contractor indicted, forced a policy change. Those were the days that made the all-nighters and stale vending machine dinners worth it. And through all of it, there was Nora. I met her at a press conference, which is almost as on the nose as meeting at a bar in a Springsteen song but slightly better lit. The city's transit authority had managed to blow through a $500 million budget on a rail extension with nothing to show for it but a hole in the ground and some very creative PowerPoints. They've brought in a new PR firm to reset the narrative. At the kickoff presser, while the CEO droned on about synergies and forward-looking timelines, I noticed the woman standing just off stage, checking her notes and occasionally giving the CEO the kind of look you reserve for toddlers and elected officials. Afterward, I elbowed through the scrum of TV cameras and city beat reporters, fired off a couple of questions, and watched her face as she tracked every word. When the circus died down, she came over. "You're Ward, right?" she said. "With the Gazette?" "That's what my email signature claims," I said. "I liked your piece on the housing vouchers," she said. "You actually read the audit instead of just quoting the press release. That's rare." "You read my stuff?" I asked. "Reporters pretend they don't care, reporters lie." "I read anything that might light my clients on fire," she said. She stuck out her hand. "Nora Summers. New PR manager for this mess." I shook her hand. "So you're the one they brought in to put lipstick on the transit pig?" She grinned. "They prefer rebuild public trust," she said. "But yes. That's the job." We grabbed coffee for background a week later. It turned into an argument about narrative framing, then a debate about whether journalism could still change anything, then a 3-hour conversation about hometowns and parents and the weirdness of living in a city that pretends it isn't Midwestern. She got my world. She knew what a deadline hangover felt like, what it meant to write something you cared about and watch it get cut for space. She knew the difference between spinning and lying, and, back then, it mattered to her. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at a botanical garden. My editor came. Her agency boss came. The photographer was someone she'd worked with on a campaign, and the DJ was a guy I'd once quoted in a story about local bands. It was very media people trying to act like normal humans. For a long time, it was good. She'd come home and tell me about clients rebranding after minor scandals, the battles she fought to keep them from saying things like "we regret the optics." I'd rant about sources ghosting me, FOIA requests languishing, officials who suddenly lost their emails. We'd compare notes, swap war stories, and when our worlds collided, when my paper went after one of her clients or vice versa, we'd navigate it carefully. "Off the record, you don't want to hang too much of your story on that one council member," she'd say. "He leaks like a broken faucet." "Off the record, your client's numbers don't add up," I'd reply. "Tell them to find an accountant who knows how to use Excel before they trot those charts out again." We had rules. No giving me documents she shouldn't have. No using her insider chatter as my only source. No leaking my story plans to her clients. Our jobs lived in the same orbit, but we kept them in separate lanes. When she left the agency world to take a job as a PR manager in the mayor's office, we revisited those rules. Hard. "You sure about this?" I'd asked when she told me. "You're going to the dark side, you know." "It's not the dark side," she said. "It's the same side, just closer to the decision-making. I'm tired of fixing messes, I want to help prevent them." "That's what they all say before they issue their first 'we take your concerns seriously' statement," I said. She swatted me with a dish towel. "Just promise you won't make this weird," she said. "You do your job. I'll do mine. If we cross streams, we do it above board." "Deal," I said. I meant it. For a while, we actually pulled it off. When I wrote about the city budget, she'd point me to public documents. When she needed to know how something would land in the press, she'd ask me, purely hypothetically. We'd joked that we were living in a permanent ethics seminar and that one day journalism students would write a case study about our dinner conversations. Then came the investigation that blew everything up. The subject had a name, obviously, but in my head he exists mostly as a type, the slick moderate. If you live in any American city, you know the guy. Centrist, well-spoken, always photographed in rolled-up sleeves working hard for you. He'd risen from council member to deputy mayor too, most recently, Commissioner for Economic Development, which is a long way of saying he had his fingers in every contract involving public money and private companies. For simplicity, let's call him Randall. Whispers about Randall had been floating around for years. Nothing solid. Just enough smoke to make investigative reporters like me perk up. This developer keeps winning bids, that campaign donor always seems to get favorable zoning decisions, so on. What finally landed on my desk was an internal memo leak from someone in procurement, detailing a pattern of no-bid contracts awarded to companies with ties to Randall's college roommate. Patterns are like catnip to me. I pitched my editor, a deep dive into the city's economic development deals, with Randall as the through line. "It'll be messy," I said. "It'll take time. But there's something there." He sighed, looked at our resource chart, then shrugged. "Fine," he said. "But if you disappear into this for 6 months, I need at least one front-page story out of it. Preferably one that doesn't get us sued into oblivion." "Would I do that to you?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "That's why I'm scared." I dug in. Documents, campaign finance reports, corporate registries. I spent more time on the state's business entity search site than is healthy. I built timelines, flowcharts, and a wall in my office that looked like a conspiracy theorist's, minus the yarn. At home, I started talking about it the way I always did with big stories. "I think I've got something," I said one night, flipping through copies at the kitchen table. "Randall keeps steering contracts to this one consulting firm. The owner's LLC ties back to his old roommate. And the firm keeps subcontracting to companies that max out donations to his PAC." Nora was stirring pasta sauce. "Be careful," she said without looking up. "He's not some low-level zoning clerk. He's the mayor's guy." "All the more reason to look," I said. "It smells bad." "Sometimes it just smells like politics," she said. "Doesn't mean it's illegal." "I didn't say illegal," I replied. "I said bad." Back in the day, that's where the conversation would have turned into an interesting argument about ethics and optics and who gets to decide where the line is. Instead, she changed the subject. "Did you remember to pay the electric bill?" she asked. I barely noticed the shift. I was too deep in my own head. A couple of weeks later, I mentioned I'd be attending a zoning board meeting where one of Randall's pet projects was up for a rubber stamp. "You know, he's actually done a lot of good," Nora said, crossing her arms. "New jobs, new developments, cleaning up blighted areas. Why are you so intent on tearing that down?" I blanked. "Because my job isn't to write press releases," I said. "It's to see if the price tag on that good includes sweetheart deals for his buddies." "You always assume the worst," she said. "Maybe you're just jealous you can't build anything yourself." That one stung. "What's with you?" I asked. "You used to buy the sunlight as the best disinfectant thing." "I still do," she said. "I just don't think you're God's appointed UV lamp." We let it drop. Or pretended to. As my reporting progressed, the tension thickened. I'd mention an interview I'd done, she'd suddenly need to check her email. I'd bring up a new document, she'd say, "You should be careful with that," in a tone that made my neck hair stand up. One night she came home late, later than usual, later than we had to stay late to finalize messaging on the sanitation strike. "Where were you?" I asked. It wasn't an accusation. Not yet. "Dinner with the team," she said, hanging up her coat. "We're rolling out a new initiative. Long day." "Team," I repeated. "Like your PR folks? Or?" She poured herself a glass of wine. "Why are you interrogating me?" she asked. "Do I ask where you've been every night you work late?" "Pretty sure you know where I am," I said. "We put the address at the top of the front page." Her jaw clenched. "Ethan, I'm exhausted," she said. "Can we not do this tonight?" I backed off. Told myself I was being paranoid. Occupational hazard. It all came crashing down at a charity gala, because of course it did. If you've never been to a big city closed fundraiser, imagine prom for adults with better booze and worse small talk. Politicians, donors, city department heads, non-profit directors, everyone pretending the chicken is good and they're not checking their phones under the table. The Gazette had a table. We weren't fancy, but we were stakeholders or community partners or some other phrase grant writers like. My editor wanted me there to schmooze. I wore my best suit, the one that makes me feel like I might know how to do my taxes, and practiced my fake laugh. Halfway through the evening, I went looking for a quieter corner. The ballroom was packed and hot. I needed air, or at least a hallway. That's when I saw them. It was one of those side rooms off the main hall, dimly lit, reserved for VIPs and donors who didn't want to be seen scarfing mini crab cakes. The door was half open. Through the gap, I saw Nora. Her hand was on Randall's arm. His hand was on the small of her back. They were standing close, too close for colleagues, not close enough for a rom-com kiss. Their heads were bowed together, her laughing at something he'd said, his mouth near her ear. I froze. You know that cliché about your ears ringing? Turns out it's mostly true. The noise from the ballroom faded into a dull rush. My pulse did a drum solo. I watched long enough to see him tuck a strand of hair behind her ear in a way that made my stomach drop. That's an intimate gesture. That's not thanks for your help with the press release. I stepped back before they saw me. I leaned against the wall and stared at an emergency exit sign like it had personally betrayed me. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for my brain to cycle through every denial script. Maybe I misread it. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe that's just how senior officials greet their PR staff now. Then I heard her voice behind me. "Ethan?" I turned. She stood there in the doorway, alone now, wineglass in hand, expression caught halfway between surprise and "how much did you see?" "Hey," I said. My voice came out flat. "Fun party." She swallowed. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Just my wife," I said. "With the guy I'm investigating. No big deal." Her eyes flashed. "Don't do this here," she said under her breath. "Do what?" I asked. "Ask why my wife is getting cozy with the subject of my expose at a private dinner she didn't mention she'd be at?" Her jaw tightened. "He's my boss," she said. "I don't have a choice about attending these things." "You have choices about where you put your hands," I said. That one landed. Her cheeks flushed. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is politics. This is how relationships are built. You think your sources don't cozy up to you?" "Not like that," I said. "And I don't threaten my spouse's career to protect them." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a breath. Might as well rip off all the band-aids. "Your office has been strangely defensive every time I ask about Randall," I said. "You've been strangely defensive. Now I see you alone with him at a closed-door dinner. So I'm going to ask you as plainly as I know how, are you involved with him? Personally? Professionally? Both?" She looked at me for a long second, then laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "You really think this is about an affair?" she said. God, Ethan. You're so predictable. The great investigative brain sees something his lizard brain doesn't like and suddenly it must be a scandal. You just described my job, I said. Except usually the person doesn't share my Netflix password. She stepped closer, voice low. Okay, she said. Let's put everything on the table. Yes, I worked closely with him. Yes, he values my input. Yes, he's taken an interest in my career. That's more than I can say for you lately. That's not an answer to the question, I said. It's the only one you're getting, she snapped. What you need to understand is this: your story isn't just a story, Ethan. It's my job. My livelihood. If you go after him the way I know you want to, you won't just be speaking truth to power. You'll be torpedoing me. I'm not going after him because I'm bored, I said. I'm going after him because the documents suggest he's laundering public money through his buddies' companies. She rolled her eyes. You've found smoke and decided there must be a wildfire, she said. Half of what you think you know is just how development works. And the other half? I asked. She took a sip of wine, then leaned in so close I could smell the Pinot on her breath. Here's how this is going to go, she said. You're going to drop this investigation. You're going to tell your editor it didn't pan out, that you've got nothing solid. You're going to move on to some other story. If you don't, if you insist on playing hero, you are going to lose. Because? I prompted, brain ping-ponging between anger and disbelief. Because he's my boss, she said. Because he's connected in ways you can't even imagine. Because if you publish some half-baked hit piece, the mayor's office will come down on your paper, advertisers will get spooked, and your editor will throw you under the bus so fast you won't know what hit you. She smiled, but it was all teeth. And if that's not enough, she added, I'll help it along. There it was. The knife. You're threatening me, I said slowly. I'm telling you reality, she said. If you don't leave this alone, I tell my boss, and anyone else who'll listen, that you're compromised. That you're only digging into him because you're jealous of our friendship. That you've been inappropriate with sources. That you've been sloppy with facts. They will believe me, Ethan. I'm the professional communicator. You're just the guy who's lucky to still have a job in a dying industry. It was such a neat inversion of our origin story, her respecting my work, me respecting hers, that for a second, all I could do was stare. You'd do that? I asked. You'd stand up there and lie about me to protect him? I tell my side, she said. And my side is the one people will hear first. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom, heels clicking on the marble, leaving me in the hallway with the emergency exit sign buzzing overhead. I went home that night alone. She needed to stay and work the room. I needed to not say something unforgivable. The fallout at the paper started almost immediately. Word travels fast in a newsroom. Especially when it involves conflict between editorial and City Hall. Within a week, my editor called me into his glass-walled office. Close the door, he said. That's never good. He steepled his fingers in that way he thinks makes him look wise. We've had concerns expressed from the mayor's office, he said carefully. About what? I asked, though I already knew. About your story, he said. About your ability to report on Randall objectively given your, he checked his notes, domestic situation. Domestic situation. Nice and clinical. Let me guess, I said. They're suggesting I have a vendetta because my wife works for him. They're suggesting there may be a conflict of interest, he said. And that if we publish something that appears to be retaliatory, they'll consider it an act of bad faith. Bad faith, I repeated. Have they considered not taking bribes as an alternative? He winced. Ethan, he said. I'm on your side. Mostly. You know that. But I've got a publisher breathing down my neck about access, about ad revenue, about not getting completely frozen out of city operations. I have to at least ask, is there anything I should know about Nora and Randall that could complicate this? There it was. The subtle way your personal life becomes discovery. She works for him, I said. I saw them at a private dinner. She asked me to drop the story. I said no. End of relevant facts. She claims you're targeting him because you're jealous, he said quietly. She called me, by the way. Said she was concerned about your mental state. My jaw clenched. She what? She implied, he went on, that you've been unstable. Obsessive. That she's worried you might misinterpret normal professional interactions as something sinister. She also mentioned the word bias about 6 times. I laughed, but it sounded brittle. That's rich, I said. Did she also mention the threats she made in the hallway at the gala? He rubbed his temples. Look, he said. We can't not pursue this because City Hall gets twitchy. I'd have Ida B. Wells's ghost haunt me. But we also can ignore the optics. So here's what we're going to do. For now, I'm keeping you on the story, but legal wants everything triple-sourced, and we're going to have another reporter shadow your work. A babysitter, I said. A co-byline, he corrected. Call it checks and balances. Around the newsroom, you could feel the temperature shift. People who used to joke with me now looked a little tentative, like I might explode. A couple of younger reporters whispered in corners when I walked by. One brave soul asked, "Dude, is it true your wife is running interference for the guy you're investigating?" Something like that, I said. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Not just the personal betrayal, but the professional doubt. My whole identity was wrapped up in being the guy who chased truth, wherever it led. Now suddenly I was under suspicion for doing exactly that. I moped. For a bit. I drank too much bad office coffee. I stared at walls. I considered dropping the whole thing, if only to stop feeling like I was dragging my life through broken glass. Then one afternoon, I was digging through Randall's public financial disclosures, again, when I noticed a line item I'd skimmed over before. PR consulting expenses. Paid not directly from his office budget, but from a non-profit civic engagement initiative he chaired. The recipient? A small PR boutique I recognized immediately. It was Nora's. Before she took the city job, she'd set up a small LLC as a holding company for freelance clients. She'd supposedly wound it down when she went full-time in the mayor's office. The records said otherwise. I dug deeper. The nonprofit took in donations from several developers who later received city contracts. The nonprofit then paid consulting fees to Nora's LLC for community engagement strategy. The amounts weren't huge individually, but together they added up. And some of the payment dates lined up suspiciously well with key votes and contract approvals. My pulse picked up. If you want to hide money, you don't drop bags of cash in an alley. You run it through structures that sound wholesome. Civic engagement. Community outreach. Who's going to scrutinize those? I pulled bank records, campaign filings, any public document that mentioned either the nonprofit or the LLC. Where the paper trail ended, I called sources, accountants, junior staffers who'd quit, a former donor who felt burned. It took weeks. Long enough that my co-reporter, Jenna, started to believe I might not be crazy after all. You seeing what I'm seeing? I asked her one evening, tapping a spreadsheet. That Randall's civic initiative operates like a slush fund and your wife's LLC is one of the pipes? She said. Yeah. I'm seeing it. It wasn't just the payments. It was emails, obtained legally and carefully, where Nora wrote things like we can route this through the initiative to avoid extra scrutiny and once the contract's locked in, we'll increase the retainer to reflect the value. On their own, those phrases could be spun. Together, they painted a picture. Nora's PR accounts were being used as a layer between questionable donations and real benefits. My first reaction, honestly, was nausea. It's one thing to suspect your wife is too cozy with a politician. It's another to see her name embedded in the money flows you've been chasing for months. You okay? Jenna asked when she saw my face. Define okay, I said. I've got the scoop of my career, and the lead character is my spouse. How do you think I am? She didn't say the obvious, you knew this might happen. Instead, she said, you going to flinch? I sat there, staring at the numbers, at my own marriage rendered as entries in a ledger. I thought about Nora in our kitchen years ago, saying, you're not God's appointed UV lamp. I thought about her in that hallway, telling me I'd lose, that she'd take me down if I got in the way. Then another phrase rose up in my head, one I typed in 1,000 headlines and mission statements: we seek the truth and help people understand the world. For years, I'd written about other people's messes. Corrupt contractors. Shady cops. CEOs who treated fines as line items. I'd comforted myself with the idea that my own house was, if not spotless, at least not on fire. Now it was smoldering. And I had a choice: look away, or point the flashlight inward. "I've written about the truth my whole life," I said, more to myself than to Jenna. "Guess it's time to prove I'm in it." We did what we always do on big stories: we triple-checked. We got an outside forensic accountant to look at the flows. We called the nonprofit for comment, they gave us boilerplate. We called Randall's office, they referred us to his lawyer, who threatened us in that polite, lawyerly way. We called Nora. I recused myself from that call. Jenna and our editor handled it. I sat in the conference room next door, staring at the wall, listening to the muffled murmur of voices. When it was over, Jenna came in, closed the door gently, and sat down. She didn't deny the payments, she said. She called them standard consulting fees. When I asked why her LLC was still active when she was on the city payroll, she said it was just leftover accounting cleanup. "And the lining up with contract awards?" I asked. She said any timing overlap was coincidental, Jenna said. And then she said you've been struggling and might be looking for patterns that aren't there. I laughed. It came out sharp. "Of course she did," I said. "Did she at least give you a good quote?" "You were trying to destroy my life to save your career," Jenna quoted. "That one'll play." Legal went over everything with a microscope. We took out anything we couldn't back up with documents. We added context wherever we could. Every sentence got a footnote, every assertion a source. Then came the question, how do we handle my personal connection? We could have gone anonymous, according to a source close to the investigation, but that would have been cowardly. We could have buried it in a paragraph halfway down. In the end, we put it up front. The story ran on a Sunday. Front page, above the fold, big headline. City economic chief funneled donations through civic nonprofit, funded PR firm tied to top staffer. Subhead, public money, private gain, and blurred lines at the heart of City Hall. My byline and Jenna's sat there, black ink on newsprint. An editor's note at the top read. Reporter Ethan Ward is married to Nora Ward, a public relations manager whose consulting firm is referenced in this story. Ward disclosed this relationship at the outset of reporting. Additional oversight was implemented to ensure the accuracy and fairness of this article. In the story itself, somewhere around the third paragraph, we spelled it out again. No hiding. No half-truths. We laid out the nonprofit's donation patterns, the contracts that followed, the payments to Nora's LLC, the quotes from emails. We quoted experts calling it a classic influence peddling structure. We quoted Randall's lawyer calling it a gross mischaracterization of routine civic engagement. We quoted Nora defending her work and accusing me of having a personal agenda. That part gutted me more than I expected. Seeing her words in the paper, opposite mine, felt like reading a divorce decree in newsprint. The reaction was immediate and loud. City Hall went into crisis mode. The mayor called a press conference to say he was deeply concerned and that there would be a full internal review. Which is politician for we're going to find a way to be shocked by things we already knew. Randall issued a statement insisting he'd done nothing wrong, but in the interest of not becoming a distraction, he was stepping back from his role pending the investigation. By Monday morning, stepping back had become submitted his resignation to spend more time with his family, and Nora's ID badge no longer worked at the mayor's office. Her PR career went into freefall. The agency world might forgive creative spin. They don't love being tied to a corruption scandal splashed across the front page of a major paper. Online, opinions split along predictable lines. Some readers called me a hero. Others called me a traitor or a terrible husband. Talk radio hosts had a field day. Would you destroy your marriage for a story? They asked callers to weigh in. People did, loudly. The paper didn't get sued. Our lawyers had done their job. Instead, we got more tips. Staffers emboldened by the coverage came forward with new information. The nonprofit folded under scrutiny. Several contracts were rebid. It was messy and imperfect and exactly the kind of fallout you hope for with a story like this. And me? I went on TV. Local public TV, nothing glamorous. A media criticism show asked me to come on and talk about the ethics of reporting on your own spouse. My first instinct was to say no. I was already exhausted, emotionally and otherwise. But then I thought, if I don't tell this part of the story myself, someone else will. So there I was, sitting under hot studio lights, makeup melting a little, trying not to look at the camera directly. The host, a cuddly professor type, asked me all the questions you'd expect. How did it feel to discover this about your wife? Did you ever consider walking away from the story? Where do you draw the line between personal loyalty and professional obligation? I answered as honestly as I could without turning it into a therapy session. At the end of the segment, she looked at me with that earnest PBS gaze and said, "If you had to sum it up in a sentence, what would you say you lost and what you gained through this process?" I took a breath. I thought about hedging. Then I decided not to. "I lost my marriage," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. "But I found the truth. And I still believe the truth is worth something." They used that line as the Pulitzer. Of course they did. It was neat, painful, and fit nicely in a chyron. Yes, I lost my wife, but I found the truth. Nora saw it. She texted me exactly once afterward. "You always cared more about your stories than me. Congratulations on finally admitting it." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Just to make space. Time did its thing. The city moved on to its next scandal. The paper got distracted by a pandemic, then a police shooting, then an election. The world kept spinning faster than any of us could write. My own life took a while to catch up. The divorce became official. Splitting assets was mostly uncomplicated. We didn't own a house, we owned a lot of books and shared memories neither of us wanted in the settlement. She kept her last name, I kept my byline. For a while, I lived like a cliché, late nights at the office, takeout containers, a plant I kept forgetting to water. Friends tried to set me up. I wasn't ready. My editor, in an uncharacteristic moment of warmth, told me to take a vacation. I went to visit my parents in their Florida condo instead and spent a week explaining the internet comments section to my dad. And then, about a year after the story ran, I got an email from a blocked-off address at the top of the masthead. Subject: Pulitzer. I clicked, thinking it was a mass memo about some other newsroom's win. Instead, it was a simple line from my editor. "Ethan, call me. Now." I did. He didn't even say hello. "They gave it to you," he said. "Gave what to me?" I asked, brain still booting up. "The damn prize," he said. "Investigative reporting. You and Jenna. You idiots actually did it." I sat down on the nearest chair. "You're serious?" I said. "As a heart attack," he replied. "They loved the way you handled the conflict of interest. Called it a model for transparency in difficult circumstances. You're going to need a better suit." The ceremony, virtual, thanks to the tail end of global chaos, was surreal. Somewhere, a voice read out our names, and I watched my own face in a tiny Zoom square react with lag. Colleagues posted congrats in the chat. Someone made a meme of my PBS call. Afterward, I sat alone in my apartment with a cheap bottle of champagne, the official notification email open on my laptop, and a printed copy of the story on a table. I thought about calling Nora. I didn't. Instead, I grabbed a pen and scribbled 3 words on the first page of the printout, right under the headline, "New Life, Clean Slate." It felt like a promise. My life didn't magically become perfect because some committee in New York put a medal next to my name. I still fight with printers. I still lose battles with copy editors. I still eat charred microwave burritos at midnight more often than my doctor would like. But the center of gravity shifted. When I walk into City Hall now, staffers straighten a little. Not because I'm some big, scary truth teller, but because they know I'll check. They know I'll dig. That's good. Healthy, even. More importantly, I've made some peace with the idea that my integrity isn't dependent on everything around me being neat. It's tested when things get messy, when the subject is your spouse, when the victim is your pride, when the cost is higher than you thought you'd ever be willing to pay. People sometimes ask me, at panels or in emails from journalism students, whether I'd do it again. Whether I'd run the story knowing exactly what it would cost. I usually say something thoughtful about the role of the press, about accountability, about how democracy dies in darkness and all that. It's not that those things aren't true. They are. They're just a little abstract. The real answer is simpler and, I think, more honest. I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd looked the other way. That doesn't make me noble. It just makes me me. These days, when I sit down to start a new story, I still get that little thrill opening a fresh document. Cursor blinking. Empty space. Anything could go there. My personal life feels a bit like that now too. Blank page. Terrifying and exciting all at once. I don't know exactly what I'll write on it. I know a few things that won't change, though. I'll chase the story. I'll check the documents. I'll try not to ruin my own life in the process, but if it comes down to comfort or truth, I know which side I'm on. And maybe, years from now, I'll be some old crank at a bar telling a younger reporter, "Yeah, kid, there was this one time I investigated a crooked official and found my own marriage in the ledger. It was hell. It was also the best journalism I ever did." If they ask me whether it was worth it, I'll raise my glass and say, depends what you value. But if you ever have to choose, remember, paper's yellow, people change, prizes gather dust. The truth? That's the one thing that might actually stick. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the AEN Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.